and sidewalks and all kinds of stuff that we take for granted now, but it was a huge deal back then. And they had this massive hotel that he built there in 1875, which became a huge center. And Orlando had nothing like that. Orlando was this backwoods town, right? So Sanford rightfully thought, why would we have this backwoods town? There's no railroad still, so it's still very hard to get to. Why would Orlando be the county seat? Sanford needs to be the county seat. So he started a campaign to move the county seat to Sanford. Made a whole lot of sense. So this sets up our second round two fight between Henry Sanford and Jacob Summerlin. Who was Jacob Summerlin? Maybe some of you guys have heard of him. He was pretty much the polar opposite of Henry Sanford. Sanford was proper and posh, and Summerlin was as cracker could get. He was born in the state of Florida. In fact, they say that he was the first child born in the Florida territory once Florida became a U.S. territory. So he had been here all his life. He had worked his way up. He had tens of thousands of head of cattle. He was a millionaire by the time he was 40. He was a big deal, but he was country, right? And so in the recent years leading up to 1875, he had gotten an interest in Orlando. He moved from Bartow to Orlando, and he bought some real estate here, and he built a hotel here. So here is our round two between Henry Sanford and Jacob Summerlin. So what's going to happen next? Well, Henry Sanford was lobbying really hard for the county seat. He was talking to the county commissioners, and they were kind of on board, but he couldn't get them to commit, and he kept hearing about this Jacob Summerlin as a thing that was standing in his way. So Sanford got into a horse and carriage. He headed down to Sanford, and on the banks of Lake Eola was the Summerlin Hotel. This is what it looked like. So Sanford walked into the Summerlin Hotel. On the way in, he passed some cowboy that was half asleep on the porch, and he demanded from the clerk that he get to speak to this Jacob Summerlin who dare stand in the way of Sir General Henry Sanford. And the clerk said, "Dude, you just passed him. He was on the porch." And so they took him back out, and the two men met face to face for the first time. Again, polar opposites. Sanford stood up and eloquently stated his case to Summerlin. Summerlin was polite, but kind of just nodded his head and said, "Well, we'll see you tomorrow at the county commission meeting." So they went to the county commission meeting and both presented their case. Henry had already talked to all the county commissioners, and they were on board. They were ready to go. So it was just kind of a technicality. So he came up there and said, "Hey, I'm going to invest in this brilliant city with all these millions. It's going to have paved roads, and all these things. It's going to be like this cosmopolitan thing. It's going to be, everybody's going to be jealous. It's going to be the county seat of county seats in this area." Done deal, right? Well, so Summerlin basically said, "Hey, are you done? Have you said all your piece?" And he said, "Yes." And Summerlin stood up and said, "Look, we've got a perfectly good county seat here. We've got land that was deeded to us for the explicit purpose of being the courthouse. If we don't have a courthouse there, they're going to have to give it back to the heirs. And here's what I'll do. I'll put up all the money to build a brand new courthouse. And if the county wants to pay me back, they can pay me back. And if not, that's cool too. It's all right with me." County commissioners changed their tune, and they said, "Hey, let's take free money." They did actually end up paying it back in 1870, 10 years later, but they built this courthouse on Summerlin's dime, and the county seat stayed in Orlando. So in the next few years, in the 1880s, the railroad came, so Orlando was much easier to get to. In the 1890s, we had a terrible freeze that set us all back, a couple decades probably. A lot of people left town. In the 1900s, things started to trail back up. And so 38 years later, Sanford was ready to go after their county seat again. But they changed their strategy now. Rather than trying to steal the county seat or move the county seat from Orlando, they said, "We're going to form our own county." So they started a movement to secede, county division from Orange County and form Seminole County. Now this effort was led by a man named Forrest Lake. And if you know anything about Sanford, this guy is notorious as they come. And he could have his own presentation. He did some good things and he did some really bad things. But he had moved to Sanford in 1886. He served 11 terms as mayor of Sanford, so he was a big deal in the town of Sanford. And at this time, in 1913, he was serving on the House of Representatives. And just to reiterate the point, he was a slick politician. He had a way of getting whatever he wanted, and the truth was no object to him. He just made it happen. So round three, I put between Forrest Lake and the Orlando Sentinel. And the reason for that wasn't necessarily the Sentinel specifically, but this war was largely waged in the newspapers. Much like today when the media is where a lot of these things happen, the Sanford Herald and the Orlando Sentinel and some of the other papers went back and forth and kind of dueled it out, with Forrest Lake kind of leading the charge. So Sanford and their crew, not Henry Sanford, but the Sanford people from Sanford, rode around to local cities and they stated their case. And some of the information they provided was accurate and some of it was completely fabricated. But they made their case pretty well. Depends on who you ask. The people in Orlando didn't feel like they made their case very well. In fact, they said all their stats they had were just made up. And the other things that they threw out there, like, oh, well, there's other counties with less population than us, there's other counties that are smaller than us, was kind of an irrelevant point that really didn't prove the need for having your own county. And Sanford also repeatedly said that taxes wouldn't go up, and they said, well, how are taxes not going to go up when you have to build another courthouse? You have to fund another staff. But regardless, they led this campaign. And somebody from Orlando, I like this quote that I found in the Orlando Sentinel. The attorney from Orlando said, "I did not hear a single statement uttered that bore the slightest resemblance to a coherent argument." That was his response after hearing the Sanfordites speak and state their case. But regardless, one more point I wanted to make is that, have you ever wondered why Seminole County looks like this? It's kind of awkwardly shaped, right? We've got this little kind of crazy cutout here, and then like Orange County's reaching up here for some reason. Why doesn't it look more like that? Well, the thing is that they originally wanted it to. Forrest Lake had a lot more ambition. He wanted a Popka on board. He wanted Maitland. He wanted Lockhart. He even talked to Fort Christmas and Bithlo. They wanted to grab all those rural areas, but most of the areas around that said no way. And here's some newspaper articles for some of these guys. Vito plans to fight secession. Tangerine, which is over by Apopka, Zellwood, they're going to fight. All these guys didn't want to be part of it. So Forrest Lake carved back his ambitions and drew the boundaries like this, and it worked. So he headed up to Tallahassee with his lobbyists, and in, I believe, April 1913, they passed it unanimously, I believe, and Seminole County was born. So after that, the town of Sanford erupted into celebration, and there was people filled the streets, and this isn't a picture of that because you don't see people filling the streets, but this is the town of Sanford about that time. And so there was like a ticker tape parade, everybody's patting the back and honking their car horns. It was a big deal. They were happy people. So what do Sanford people do when they're happy? They roll out a cannon. They had a cannon that had been part of every celebration that anybody remembered in the town of Sanford. Some people said it dated all the way back to the Second Seminole War. Some people said that was baloney. But regardless, it had been there for decades. When the president came to town, they fired the cannon. When the holidays were around, they fired the cannon. So you better believe they're going to fire this cannon within New County. So they got a little overly ambitious. They overloaded this cannon, and the cannon shattered. It cracked into a bunch of pieces. And at first I thought this all was just a fable, but I did uncover some newspaper headlines referring to that. You can see here talking about Sanford citizens busted their cannon. So it really did happen. And the cool thing is, if you go to downtown Sanford today, there's this is the Chamber of Commerce. And there's this flagpole that looks kind of unassuming there. And so you inspect it a little bit closer, and if you kind of turn your head a little bit, you can maybe picture a cannon pointed upwards. The legend has it that this is the remnants of the cannon, that after it cracked and exploded, they took what was left in it, dropped it in cement, and turned it into a flagpole. So next time you're in downtown Sanford, check that out. So that's it. That's the story. Seminole County got its courthouse. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
I have a question.
Sure.
You just got the silly. Where the cannon at the flagpole, is the cannon under there, or is that the rest of the cannon?
That's the legend.
That's the barrel.
Yeah.
You got the little stem sticking out, and I'm wondering if the cannon is under there.
That's what they say.
Oh.
They said that if you basically excavate that and in cement, obviously, but they said that you would find that original cannon there or what was left of it. Yes, sir.
I can speak to that. Yes, that is the barrel of the cannon. The way it shattered, it exploded near the breech, and so, well, it wasn't a breech-loading cannon, but it exploded near the touch hole. And the barrel, the majority of the barrel was salvaged, and actually Brigitte Stevenson over at the Sanford Museum has just traced the lineage of ownership for that.
Oh, cool.
So we can verify that, yes, indeed, that is the erect barrel of the cannon.
So there you go. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Your picture out there was not of the first courthouse.
This was the, yeah, you're right. This is the second courthouse. So this courthouse was the courthouse in 1918. Was a former Elks Lodge, and I believe the first. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sounds like you know, but I believe the first one was the Worthington Hotel.
It was Vasquez.
The Vasquez, which was, I'm sorry, the Worthington Hotel was in Orlando. Correct. The Vasquez Hotel was the first one, and that was normally how they did things when they first needed a courthouse. I see that over and over in a lot of counties. They'll first put the courthouse in a hotel, and then they'll build an actual courthouse.
It was the Valdez.
The Valdez, which was right there near the pier.
Just south of that building.
Okay. Yeah, this was, I believe, on Park. Yep,
Park and Commercial.
Park and Commercial. So,
I'm one of the few attorneys who actually tried to pay
really?
the 1918.
Oh, and he said he was one of the few attorneys who tried the case.
It also had the county commission chambers in there, and across the street from it was the Sanford Zoo.
Yes.
And they used that until 1972.
1972.
Where the current civil courthouse is there on Lakeland Road now.
Very cool history. Yeah, that's interesting. So I read a story recently. He mentioned the zoo, so I'm going to talk about the zoo for 1 second. And the guy who they say stuffed the cannon was a man by the name of SCHism, according to legend. And they say that he not only stuffed the cannon, but he owned the first monkey that he somehow acquired from a circus, which became the founding of the Sanford Zoo. So that's a story in of itself, but basically donated that monkey to the fire department. The original Sanford Zoo was right downtown, right off the pier, right across from the courthouse in Sanford before they moved it to its current location. Yes, sir.
What year did we stop at here? What year did we?
So 1930. So the presentation was basically from 1821 until 1913.
Well, you missed Clark that settled Goldsboro.
Sure. So Joe Clark, I believe, founded Goldsboro, and they were also the other Clark. There's two Clark brothers. One founded Goldsboro, one founded Eatonville, and Goldsboro does not like Forest Lake very much. Let's just say that. So as I told you before, Forest Lake was not the best loved character. Goldsboro was the second African American community, I believe, in the state of Florida. Eatonville, and then Goldsboro in 1893, I believe, it was founded. And Forest Lake basically stole the charter from Goldsboro in 1911. So Forest Lake was not the nicest guy.
Now it's been a cool slide.
What's that? Yes, sir.
A cool slide.
It definitely would have been. I love to do another presentation and talk about that history. It would be awesome.
Where did Celery City come from?
Celery City was because Sanford was the primary crop for a long time in Sanford was celery. So they grew a ton of it. I'm not sure when that went out of fashion, maybe 1830s-ish. Kind of started not being as big of a crop, but that was the main crop for the region. Yeah, 30s. Yeah, sorry. Any other questions? Okay.